occupied France. August 1943. Dawn light filters through morning mist at a remote Luftwaffe airfield, and Oberleutnant Werner Schultz stands before an aircraft that shouldn't exist. The American P-47 Thunderbolt sits on the tarmac like an accusation, grotesquely fat, impossibly heavy. German pilots have been calling it Die fliegende Bierflasche, the flying beer bottle. Looking at it now, wheels sunk into grass from sheer weight, Schultz understands why. This thing is massive, nearly 8 tons fully loaded. The Focke-Wulf FW-190, Germany's frontline fighter, weighs about 4 tons. The P-47 is double that. But Schultz isn't a pilot. He's an aeronautical engineer, chief technical officer of Jagdgeschwader 26. His job is to understand enemy aircraft, identify weaknesses, recommend tactical countermeasures. For months, German pilots have been encountering this massive American fighter, reporting capabilities that seemed impossible. Speed at altitude, the ability to absorb damage that would obliterate a German fighter, firepower that turned the sky into a wall of tracers. And now, finally, Schultz has one on the ground. Largely intact, this is intelligence gold. As he approaches with notebook in hand, he has no idea that in the next 48 hours he will uncover a truth that will haunt him for the rest of his life. This aircraft isn't just a fighter plane, it's mathematical proof. Evidence of an industrial capacity so vast that Germany's defeat is already inevitable. When Schultz's team removes the cowling, they stand in silence. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp stares back. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 perfect rows of 9. Each cylinder head machined to tolerances that German factories struggle to maintain even in their best facilities. The crankshaft is a masterpiece of metallurgy balanced with precision that speaks to manufacturing capabilities far beyond German production. Every component gleams with quality. No evidence of shortcuts, no signs of resource constraints that plague every German engine manufacturer. This is engineering that makes Schultz's chest tighten with professional admiration and strategic dread. He pulls out his slide rule and begins calculating. Based on displacement, 2,800 cubic inches, far larger than any German radial, this engine produces at least 2,000 horsepower, possibly 2,200 at war emergency power. His hand stops. The BMW 801, Schultz says quietly to his assistant Klaus. What does it produce at maximum output? Klaus's face goes carefully neutral. 1,700 horsepower, Herr Oberleutnant. Maybe 1,750 if we push beyond recommended limits. Any more risks catastrophic failure. 20 to 30% more power. The Americans are mass-producing engines with 20 to 30% more power than Germany's best radial, with apparent ease. No compromises visible in construction quality. But it gets worse. Schultz examines the engine's construction, looking for shortcuts, compromises, any sign of resource constraints. Material shortages have forced German manufacturers to make endless accommodations. Lower-grade alloys, simplified processes, anything to keep production moving. He finds none of that here. High-grade aluminum alloys throughout. Precision bearings showing no cost-cutting. Components manufactured with tolerances requiring sophisticated machine tools and skilled labor. This engine is built the right way, not the expedient way, the way you build when you have unlimited access to materials and manufacturing capacity. A young lieutenant from Messerschmitt points to the cylinder design. Herr Oberleutnant, each cylinder is individually removable. You can replace one damaged component without disassembling the entire engine. It's brilliant, infuriating. German engines require extensive disassembly for major repairs. This American design assumes maintenance will happen frequently in the field and needs to be efficient. They're thinking 3 steps ahead while Germany tries solving yesterday's problems with yesterday's resources. The real revelation comes when Schultz traces the exhaust system. Instead of dumping exhaust gases straight out, the P-47 routes them through elaborate ducting that snakes down through the fuselage to the rear. The ducting is massive, heavily insulated, clearly designed for extreme temperatures. There, mounted in the tail where most fighters carry nothing, sits the component that makes Schultz's blood run cold. A turbo supercharger, not a prototype, production equipment built into every P-47 rolling off American assembly lines. He's read intelligence reports about this system. Seeing it in person is different. This isn't theory. This is engineering reality, challenging everything he understands about production aircraft. The system is elegant and complex. Exhaust gases are routed to a turbine in the tail. The exhaust spins the turbine at over 20,000 RPM. That turbine drives a compressor forcing pressurized air back into the engine's intake. At high altitude, where air is thin and engines gasp for oxygen, the turbo supercharger makes the R2800 think it's still at sea level. Full power regardless of altitude. The engineering is staggering. Exhaust ducting must withstand temperatures exceeding 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. The turbine spins at speeds that would tear apart inferior bearings. The entire system requires precise calibration to avoid overboosting and destroying pistons. Germany has experimented with turbo superchargers. The Focke-Wulf TAR 152 prototype uses one, but fielding it operationally has proven impossible. Technical challenges too great. Materials too difficult to source, manufacturing too complex for factories already struggling. Here it is in an American fighter being mass-produced by the thousands. Standard production equipment. Schultz does the calculations. With the turbo supercharger, the P-47 maintains full power at altitudes where German fighters are suffocating. At 25,000 feet, the FW-190 and BF-109 lose significant performance. Power drops, climb rate decreases, maneuverability suffers. The P-47 is just hitting its stride, fast, powerful, dominant in the high-altitude realm where German interceptors must reach American bomber formations. Klaus asks what everyone is thinking. Can we replicate this, Herr Oberleutnant? Schultz shakes his head slowly. Not with our current manufacturing capacity. This requires precision machining beyond what most factories can achieve. High-grade steel alloys, we're already rationing those for U-boats. Specialized bearings that can handle these temperatures. We're struggling to produce basic aircraft. Adding this complexity... He pauses. Even among his team, suggesting Germany lacks capability is dangerous. Defeatism gets men shot. It's beyond our current capabilities. Perhaps if we'd started development 3 years ago, before resource shortages became critical. But now? We're fighting to maintain existing production. Revolutionary systems require industrial capacity we no longer possess. The words taste like ashes, but they're true. The P-47 before him has taken serious battle damage. This isn't a precautionary landing. This aircraft fought, absorbed punishment that should have destroyed it, and still made it back. 20mm cannon shells have torn through the fuselage, at least 6 impacts. Machine gun fire has riddled the wings. He stops counting at 40 holes. A BF-109 hit like this would have disintegrated. Even the heavily built FW-190 would likely have gone down. But the P-47 flew back, made a controlled landing. The pilot walked away with minor injuries. Schultz measures skin thickness with calipers. Heavy-gauge aluminum, significantly thicker than German fighters use. Where a BF-109 might use 1.5mm aluminum, the P-47 uses 2mm or even 2.5mm in critical areas. In aviation, where every gram matters, that's massive. Internal framing is robust, overbuilt by German standards. Stringers and formers spaced closer together, creating redundant structure. Control cables are redundant. If one is cut, backups take over automatically. Cockpit armor is extensive. Thick steel plates behind and beneath the pilot, side armor against deflection shots. The windscreen is armored glass, nearly 40mm, almost 2 inches of laminated bulletproof glass. And that massive radial engine serves as a shield. Unlike liquid-cooled inline engines with vulnerable coolant systems that can be punctured by a single bullet, the radial has no such weakness. You can shoot cylinders completely off and it keeps running. Reports describe P-47's returning with 2 or 3 cylinders destroyed, running rough but still producing enough power to fly. He pulls damage reports from Luftwaffe units. The pattern is horrifying. P-47's absorbing punishment that would destroy German fighters, then flying home. One report describes a P-47 taking 21 confirmed cannon hits and making it back to England. Another describes a pilot emptying his entire ammunition load into a P-47 and watching in disbelief as it simply dove away. An engineer from Focke-Wulf observes, "It's over-engineered, Herr Oberleutnant. They've added weight for durability that could have been used for performance. If they'd built it lighter, like we do, it would be even faster." Schultz nods. Yes. But they can afford to. They have engines powerful enough to carry the extra weight. We don't. We optimize for lightness because we lack engine power to overcome mass. We build at the edge of what's possible. They build with margins of safety we can't afford. It's a fundamental difference driven by industrial capacity. Germany builds aircraft at the edge of technical possibility, squeezing every ounce of performance from limited resources. Brilliant engineering, but it creates fragile aircraft that can't absorb damage. America builds with massive safety margins. Overbuilt structures, redundant systems, heavy armor. They compensate for inefficiency with brute force. And brutally, the American approach works better. A fragile, perfectly optimized fighter that gets shot down is worthless. A heavy, overbuilt fighter that brings its pilot home is priceless. 8 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing. Schultz does the math automatically, each calculation driving the knife deeper. Approximately 425 rounds per gun. Total, 3,400 rounds, combined rate of fire, over 100 rounds per second when all 8 guns fire simultaneously. 100 heavy projectiles every second. A 2-second burst unleashes 200 rounds downrange. German fighters typically carry 2 or 4 machine guns plus 1 or 2 20mm cannons. A Bf-109G carries a single 20mm cannon with 150 rounds plus 2 13mm machine guns with 300 rounds each. Total, 750 rounds. Once expended, the mission is over. German pilots learn extreme ammunition discipline. Fire in short, precise bursts. Make every round count. The P-47 pilot can fire almost continuously for 30 seconds. Multiple long bursts across several engagements with ammunition remaining. But it's not just quantity. These are heavy, high-velocity projectiles. Each weighs about 1.6 ounces and leaves the barrel at nearly 2,900 feet per second. Designed to punch through armor with devastating effect. German pilots report 50 caliber fire as catastrophic. 1 hit can sever a control cable. 2 or 3 can shatter a wing spar. A sustained burst turns aircraft into debris. With 8 guns converging at 300 yards, anything caught in that cone faces obliteration. At optimal range, all 8 streams meet at the same point. The target doesn't get hit by 1 or 2 guns. It gets hit by all 8 simultaneously. German aircraft with lightweight construction simply disintegrate. 8 guns times 13 rounds per second equals 104 bullets per second. A 2-second burst puts 208 rounds into a 10-foot circle. No fighter survives that. Schultz writes, recommendation, avoid head-on engagements with P-47. Probability of surviving return fire, minimal. Stern attacks only, break off immediately. Do not engage in extended combat. But even as he writes it, he knows the advice is nearly useless. How do you engage an enemy only from behind when that enemy is faster than you at altitude? That evening, Schultz begins compiling his report, but he can't stop with just the aircraft. He needs context. One P-47 is a technical curiosity. thousands represent something far more threatening. He requests production data. What arrives makes the P-47's technical sophistication seem almost secondary. Republic Aviation is building these fighters at a rate exceeding 500 aircraft per month from their Farmingdale, New York facility. Plans call for ramping up to 600, 700, even 800 monthly. Schultz stares at the numbers. German factories struggle to produce 300 to 400 single-engine fighters per month total, across all types. And German production is constantly disrupted by Allied bombing. The Americans are building P-47's alone at nearly twice Germany's total fighter output. And that's just one American fighter type. They're also building P-38's, P-51's, P-40's, numerous other types, simultaneously. But the numbers get worse. The R-2800 engine isn't exclusive to the P-47. Intelligence reports indicate it powers the F-6F Hellcat, F-4U Corsair, A-26 Invader, multiple other aircraft types. The Americans designed this engine as a general-purpose power plant adaptable to multiple airframes. Total R-2800 production will exceed 125,000 units during the war. Schultz checks the figure 3 times, certain he's misread something. 125,000 of these 2,000 horsepower engines. Germany's entire aircraft engine production for all types across the entire war will be roughly 250,000 units, most significantly less powerful than the R-2800. Germany will produce perhaps 35,000 BMW 801 radials. The Americans are building more than 3 times that number of engines that are 20 to 30% more powerful. He sits back. The lamp flickers. Outside, sounds of the airfield at night, guards, distant conversation, aircraft being serviced. The disparity isn't just significant, it's incomprehensible. This isn't competition. It's a mismatch so fundamental that tactical brilliance becomes irrelevant. You cannot outfly production capacity. You cannot outmaneuver industrial infrastructure. American aircraft production for 1943 is projected to exceed 85,000 aircraft. German production will reach perhaps 25,000, a ratio of more than 3 to 1. But even that understates the gap because American aircraft are heavier and more complex. A single B-17 requires more aluminum, more man-hours than 3 Bf-109s. The Americans are building thousands of B-17s. They're building B-24s in even greater numbers. One factory produces them at a rate of 1 bomber per hour. German factories can produce perhaps 10 fighters per day with round-the-clock shifts. American aluminum production in 1943, approximately 920,000 tons. German, perhaps 250,000 tons. American steel, over 80 million tons. German, 30 million tons. The Americans aren't just building more aircraft, they're building more of everything. America will produce over 800,000 trucks in 1943 alone. The entire German army has perhaps 500,000 vehicles total, most worn out. Schultz realizes with crystalline clarity that he's not analyzing an aircraft. He's analyzing defeat. Mathematical, inevitable defeat that no amount of courage or tactical skill can prevent. The equation doesn't balance, it can't balance, and every component of the P-47 is evidence of this imbalance. Schultz's final report takes 3 days. He writes carefully, conveying technical truth while avoiding language that might get him arrested for defeatism. Tell too much truth, and you're undermining morale. Tell too little, and the report is worthless. His summary reads, "The P-47 Thunderbolt represents industrial and technological sophistication exceeding Germany's current capabilities in several critical areas. Its widespread deployment suggests American production capacity far exceeds previous intelligence estimates." Technical assessment. The R-2800 engine produces approximately 2,000 horsepower through advanced metallurgy and precision manufacturing that would require significant retooling to replicate. The turbo supercharger system, while theoretically achievable, demands materials and manufacturing capabilities not currently available in sufficient quantities. The airframe's durability results from heavy-gauge construction that our weight-limited designs cannot incorporate without corresponding increases in engine power, which we cannot achieve. Armament superiority, 8 50-caliber machine guns with 3,400 rounds total, provides overwhelming firepower advantage. German fighters' lighter armament and limited ammunition require tactical precision the P-47's volume of fire does not. Recommendation: tactical adjustments to minimize high-altitude engagements. Utilize superior low-altitude maneuverability of FW-190. Avoid extended combat. Hit-and-run tactics only. Preserve experienced pilots through conservative engagement doctrine. Strategic assessment. Continued attrition against numerically and technically superior enemy aircraft will result in unsustainable losses. Current replacement rates insufficient to maintain operational strength against projected American production increases. The last paragraph is dangerous. He's essentially saying, we can't win this fight. But he phrases it as operational assessment, not political conclusion. A distinction that might keep him out of a Gestapo interrogation room. His commanding officer, Oberst Heinrich Walter, reads the report with respect and concern. Walter is old Luftwaffe, a World War I veteran who recognizes competent analysis. You know this will not be well received in Berlin, Walter says quietly. They don't want to hear that American aircraft are superior. They certainly don't want to hear our production capacity is insufficient. Should I alter the findings, Herr Oberst? The measurements are accurate. The calculations are correct. Walter shakes his head. No. The report is accurate, and accuracy matters. But prepare yourself. The leadership doesn't respond well to uncomfortable truths. They'll likely dismiss this as pessimism or accuse you of being influenced by enemy propaganda. I've examined the aircraft myself. This isn't propaganda. This is physical reality sitting on our airfield. I know, I believe you. But belief and acceptance are different things in Berlin these days. The report is forwarded through Luftflotte headquarters to the Air Ministry in Berlin. Schultz never receives an official response, but he hears through informal channels that it's been dismissed as overly pessimistic. One staff officer reportedly called Schultz demoralized by enemy propaganda and described the P-47 as crude American engineering inferior to our designs through over-reliance on brute force rather than efficiency. The irony is almost funny. Yes, the P-47 relies on brute force. That's precisely the point. When you have unlimited brute force available, efficiency becomes less critical than survivability. Schultz isn't surprised. Intelligence that contradicts Nazi ideology is rejected, regardless of accuracy. The regime is built on the premise that German superiority will overcome material disadvantages. That willpower matters more than industrial capacity. That ideology can defeat mathematics. They're wrong. Men like Schultz know they're wrong. But knowing the truth and being able to act on it are entirely different things. In the months following his report, Schultz watches his predictions come true with mathematical inevitability. P-47s appear in increasing numbers over Europe. What started as occasional encounters becomes routine. By early 1944, every major mission faces P-47 escorts. The American fighters range deeper into Germany, staying with bomber formations all the way to targets that used to be safely beyond escort range. German fighter losses mount steadily. Experienced pilots, men with hundreds of hours of combat time, are shot down and killed, and they're not being replaced adequately. Training programs can't keep pace. There's not enough fuel, not enough experienced instructors. New pilots arrive at frontline units with perhaps 50 hours of flight time, barely enough to operate the aircraft safely, nowhere near enough to survive combat against American pilots in superior machines. A Bf-109 pilot with 50 hours facing a P-47 pilot with 300 hours in a technically superior aircraft isn't a fair fight. It's execution. The tactical recommendations Schultz made are slowly, grudgingly adopted. Some units implement them effectively, others ignore them, believing that German fighting spirit can overcome material disadvantage. Those units die faster. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe is being systematically destroyed through attrition it cannot sustain. The Americans lose aircraft too. The P-47 isn't invulnerable, but they replace losses faster than Germany can inflict them. For every P-47 shot down, 2 more arrive from America. For every German fighter lost, there's no replacement. Or the replacement is flown by an inexperienced pilot who'll likely die on his first mission. Schultz examines other captured American aircraft as they become available. Each tells the same story. A C-47 transport, one of over 10,000 produced. Germany's entire transport fleet consists of a few hundred aircraft, mostly obsolete Ju-52s. A P-51 Mustang with a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, produced under license, thousands of them, giving the Mustang range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Every aircraft reinforces the same conclusion. Germany is losing an industrial war to an enemy with overwhelming material superiority. And the leadership either doesn't understand or refuses to accept it. April 1946. Bavaria, American occupation zone. Werner Schultz sits across from Captain Robert Henderson, U.S. Army Air Force's technical intelligence. Between them lies Schultz's August 1943 report, retrieved from German Air Ministry files in Berlin. Did you really conclude from examining one aircraft that Germany would lose the war? Henderson asks. Schultz considers carefully. I concluded that Germany could not win an industrial war against America. The P-47 was evidence of production capacity we couldn't match. Every component required resources and manufacturing capability exceeding Germany's total capacity. Not what we could achieve with better organization, what we could physically accomplish with available resources. But you were just one engineer. Surely others reached the same conclusion. Many did. Albert Speer certainly understood. He was Minister of Armaments. Admiral Canaris's intelligence service provided accurate reports on American industrial capacity. Adolf Galland recognized the tactical implications. Field commanders saw the reality daily. Schultz pauses. But in the Third Reich, stating inconvenient truths was dangerous. Better to remain silent than be accused of defeatism. Men were shot for less, so you kept your head down, did your job, and hoped someone higher up was paying attention. Henderson nods. We found your report in the captured files. It was marked, filed, no action required. Did that surprise you? Schultz laughs without humor. No, Captain. I expected exactly that. The Nazi leadership didn't want intelligence. They wanted validation of what they already believed. When reality contradicted ideology, reality was dismissed. What's the lesson here? Schultz is quiet for a long moment. That mathematics doesn't care about ideology. That industrial capacity is as much a weapon as any tank or fighter. That when engineers tell you uncomfortable truths based on evidence, you ignore them at your peril. He gestures to the report. This should have been a wake-up call. It should have triggered fundamental reassessment of Germany's strategic position. We couldn't match American production. We couldn't replicate their technological sophistication. Those facts should have led to different strategic decisions. But instead, it was filed away and forgotten. Or worse, dismissed as defeatism. The regime preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. And that's perhaps the real lesson. Technical competence means nothing if the political system punishes honesty. When you were examining that P-47, was there a specific moment when you realized the full implications? Schultz doesn't hesitate. The turbo supercharger. When I traced the exhaust ducting and found that system in the tail, I understood immediately. This wasn't just a better aircraft. This was evidence of an industrial philosophy we couldn't compete with. The Americans were building production fighters with technology we couldn't even field in prototypes, and they were doing it by the thousands. He pauses. That's when I knew. Not thought, not suspected, knew. Germany would lose this war because we were fighting an opponent that existed in a different technological and industrial category. The outcome was as certain as any mathematical proof. The P-47 Thunderbolt went on to become one of the most produced fighters of World War II. Over 15,600 were built between 1942 and 1945. They destroyed thousands of German aircraft in air-to-air combat. They proved even more devastating in ground attack, destroying locomotives, vehicles, bridges, anything that moved on Germany's transportation network. But perhaps the P-47's most important contribution wasn't measured in kills or missions. It was what the aircraft represented. A statement of industrial philosophy that Germany couldn't counter. Total American aircraft production from 1940 to 1945, over 300,000 aircraft. German production in the same period, approximately 94,000. The United States built more P-47's alone than Germany built Bf-109s and FW-190s combined. The R-2800 engine that stunned Schultz became one of history's most successful aircraft engines. Manufactured not just by Pratt & Whitney, but by Ford, Chevrolet, Nash Kelvinator, and other automotive factories converted to war production. Over 125,000 of them. Each one a 2,000 horsepower testament to industrial mobilization, unprecedented in human history. The production numbers tell a story beyond statistics. They represent fundamental transformation of American society. Within 18 months of Pearl Harbor, the United States converted its massive automotive industry to military production. It was industrial capitalism operating at a scale that defied previous human experience. And it wasn't just quantity. Quality remained consistently high throughout the war. Late-war American aircraft showed no declining standards, no shortcuts, no compromises. A P-47 built in 1945 was as well constructed as one built in 1943, often better as production techniques improved. German aircraft, by contrast, showed increasing evidence of resource constraints. Lower-grade materials, simplified construction, quality control issues. By 1945, German fighters were being built with wooden components, non-strategic materials, anything to keep production moving despite complete collapse of the resource base. The P-47 proved something military strategists had theorized but never demonstrated at this scale, that industrial capacity could be decisive in modern warfare. More decisive than tactics, more decisive than courage, more decisive than individual weapon performance. Schultz's story exemplifies a broader tragedy of Nazi Germany. The regime created a system where technical competence and accurate analysis were subordinate to ideological conformity. Germany had brilliant engineers, Ernst Heinkel, Willy Messerschmitt, Kurt Tank, men who designed aircraft pushing the boundaries of possibility. They had capable scientists working on everything from jet engines to rockets. They had intelligence services providing reasonably accurate information about enemy capabilities. What they didn't have was a system that could process that information rationally. Every analysis was filtered through ideological assumptions. German racial superiority, the weakness of democratic societies, the inevitable triumph of will over material circumstances. When evidence contradicted these assumptions, the evidence was dismissed rather than assumptions being reconsidered. Schultz's report should have prompted serious questions. If American aircraft were this sophisticated and being produced in these numbers, what did that say about American industrial capacity? What were the strategic implications? Instead, the report was filed away. The uncomfortable questions weren't asked. and German pilots continued flying into combat against increasingly overwhelming odds, sacrificing their lives in a cause that mathematics had already proven was lost. This pattern played out in other domains. Intelligence reports about Soviet tank production were dismissed. Warnings about American shipbuilding capacity were ignored. Economic analyses showing Germany couldn't sustain a long war were rejected as defeatist. The Nazi regime built a system where truth was dangerous and comfortable lies were rewarded. In the short term, this maintained morale and political unity. In the long term, it guaranteed strategic blindness and catastrophic decision-making. August 1943. A German engineer examines an enemy aircraft and sees the future with perfect clarity. He documents it meticulously. He reports it accurately. He makes recommendations based on sound analysis and mathematical certainty, and he's ignored. Werner Schulz's experience represents one of history's great tragedies of expertise disregarded. He was right about everything: the P-47's technical superiority, American production capacity, the strategic implications, the inevitable outcome. He saw it all in the components of a single aircraft, the precision-machined cylinders of that R2800 engine, the sophisticated turbo-supercharger system, the robust construction, the overwhelming firepower. Every detail was a data point in a calculation that led to an inescapable conclusion. Germany was fighting a war it could not win against an opponent whose industrial capacity exceeded anything in human experience. No amount of tactical brilliance, courage, or fighting spirit could overcome that fundamental imbalance. The mathematics were clear, the physics were undeniable, the outcome was inevitable. But truth is only useful if someone is willing to hear it. In a system built on ideology rather than evidence, even perfect analysis is worthless if it contradicts the prevailing narrative. So the P-47's kept coming. Hundreds became thousands. They ranged deeper into Germany, untouchable at high altitude, devastating in ground attack, survivable in ways that seemed almost supernatural to German pilots trained to believe in their own superiority. And German pilots kept dying, experienced aces and raw recruits alike, shot down by an enemy they couldn't outclimb, couldn't outrun at altitude, couldn't outshoot. Fighting bravely, often skillfully, in a cause that mathematics had already proven was lost. By 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Not because German pilots lacked courage, not because German aircraft were poorly designed, but because Germany fought an industrial war with insufficient industry and refused to accept that reality until Soviet tanks were in Berlin and American bombers owned the sky. So we ask you, what would you have done in Schulz's position? When you examine the evidence and reach an inescapable conclusion, when you document it thoroughly and report it accurately, when you make recommendations based on sound analysis and are ignored because your truth is politically inconvenient. Do you keep telling the truth, knowing it won't change anything? Do you remain silent and watch disaster unfold? Do you continue doing your job, hoping that someone, somewhere might listen? There are no easy answers. Schulz chose to write the truth as he saw it, knowing it would likely be dismissed. Other engineers chose silence. Both groups watched the same catastrophe unfold. The P-47 wasn't just a fighter aircraft, it was a message written in aluminum and steel, delivered by engine thunder and .50 caliber fire. It said, "This is what industrial might looks like. This is what happens when a nation's full productive capacity focuses on war. This is what you're actually fighting." One German engineer heard that message clearly in August 1943. He tried to tell his superiors what it meant, and in the end, his accuracy didn't matter because the system wasn't designed to process accurate information that contradicted its core beliefs. That's the real lesson of the flying beer bottle. Not about engines or turbo superchargers or production numbers. About what happens when truth becomes dangerous and expertise is subordinate to ideology. Werner Schulz saw the future in a captured fighter's components. He documented it precisely. He reported it honestly. And then he watched helplessly as history proved him right in the most devastating way possible. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in the sky. They're fought in engineering reports that leaders refuse to read, in production numbers that ideology cannot overcome, in the moment when a single engineer examines an enemy's machine and realizes his nation is already defeated. Germany had the engineers. They had the intelligence. They had the technical expertise to understand exactly what they faced. What they didn't have was a system that could act on that understanding. And that made all the difference.